We always hear about bees as these like tireless workers, right? Just
Yeah.
constantly going from flower to flower. But like, what if their society is even more complex than we realize? What if it's actually like a democracy?
Yeah, it's really interesting to consider. These little creatures, they work together and they actually show some behaviors that really do have some similarities to like democratic systems.
Wow, that's a really fascinating way to think about it. So, to kind of wrap our heads around how this whole bee democracy thing works, we did a deep dive into a podcast episode called The Buzz on Bee Democracy: Collective Intelligence in Action. And it was from the show Nature's Wonders. And it really kind of changes the way we think about bees.
Yeah.
So, to start off, maybe we can talk about how they communicate, because it's not like they're just sitting around, having debates over tea and honey, right?
Not exactly those kind of debates, no. But they do have this like incredibly sophisticated way of talking to each other, mainly through something we call the waggle dance.
Okay, the waggle dance. I've heard of that before, but like explain it to me like I'm seeing a bee do it for the first time.
So picture this, right? A bee finds this amazing field full of flowers, tons of them. So it goes back to the hive and does this dance, these like wiggles and turns, and that tells the other bees in the hive exactly where that field is and how far away.
So it's like a bee GPS system. Like fly 2 miles that way past the big oak tree and you'll find the good stuff.
Exactly. It's like their own little communication system,
Yeah.
right? But it tells them the direction and the distance, and it's incredibly accurate. It's really amazing when you think about how complex it actually is.
That's wild. It's like a secret language only they know. But how does this all tie back to the idea of a bee democracy?
Well, this is where this concept of collective intelligence comes into play. So bees, when they work together as a group, they consistently make smarter decisions than if any single bee was trying to do it on its own. And the waggle dance, that's a key part of that whole process.
Collective intelligence, that's a really interesting concept. Can you maybe give me an example of how that actually works in a bee colony?
Absolutely. Let's say a colony of bees needs to find a new hive, right? When that happens, they send out these scout bees and they go out and search. And when they come back, you guessed it, they do the waggle dance to describe the spots they found.
So it's not just for finding food. They actually use this dance for these big decisions that affect the whole colony.
That's exactly right. The other bees in the hive, they watch these dances and then they kind of evaluate all the options. And after a while, they all kind of agree on the best spot. It's like they're making a group decision together. It's not just the queen bee making all the calls.
So it's almost like a debate, but instead of talking, they're using this really specific dance language. And it's amazing how they all come to an agreement through this.
Yeah, and it's not just about following the first scout that gets back to the hive. It's about multiple bees showing what they found, and then the colony kind of weighs the good and the bad, and slowly they start to agree on the best option.
Wow, this is making me see bees in a totally different light. It's like they're having these little elections, but with dance. So if they're making all these group decisions, does that mean there's not really a single leader in a bee colony?
Well, there is a queen bee, of course, but her main job is to lay eggs and keep the colony growing. But when it comes to things like choosing a new hive, that's definitely a team effort. And that brings us to a really mind-blowing idea: the bee colony as a superorganism.
A superorganism. Okay, you're going to have to break that one down for me.
It might sound a little strange at first, but think of it like this. Every bee has a job to do right. Some are workers, some are drones, and then there's the queen. But they all work together so smoothly that the colony actually acts like a single unit, a really efficient one, too.
So it's kind of like every bee is like a cell in a larger body, and the whole colony is the actual organism.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Mm.
And just like in our bodies, every single part is important for the whole thing to work and to survive.
That's amazing. It's a whole different level of cooperation. Maybe we humans could learn a thing or two from them. This whole idea of the colony as a superorganism, it makes you think, is there something more going on here than just instinct?
That's where things get really interesting. Some studies have actually found some surprising similarities between how bee colonies make decisions and how our own brains process information.
Wait, are you saying my brain is like a beehive?
Not exactly, but the research suggests there's some interesting parallels in how bees and humans process information to make decisions.
Okay, that's still pretty mind-blowing. So we could actually learn something about our own brains by studying bees.
It's possible. This research is still going on, but it's definitely a fascinating area to explore. It really raises some interesting questions about how we think and understand things collectively. And maybe learning about how simpler systems like bee colonies work could help us understand our own brains, which are so much more complex.
This is so fascinating. It makes you wonder, how do these little bee brains working together? How do they manage to make these really complex decisions? Is there some kind of system they're following?
Well, remember how we were talking about the waggle dance and how it communicates distance and direction so precisely? Well, it turns out bees are actually following some pretty sophisticated principles when they make these choices. And it's not just bees either. We see these same principles in a lot of different species, even humans.
So you're talking about like laws of physics, but applied to how we make decisions.
Exactly. There are these things called psychophysical laws, and they describe how living things sense and react to different things in their environment. And guess what? When bees are choosing hives, finding food, making other decisions, they seem to be following these same laws.
Oh, okay.
Now,
That's really cool. Can you give me like a specific example of a psychophysical law that's at work in a bee colony?
sure. One example is Weber's law. And this law says that the smallest difference you can notice between two things depends on how strong the first thing is. So like if you're holding like a little pebble and I add another one, you'll definitely notice it's heavier, right? But if you're holding a big rock and I add that same pebble, you probably won't even feel the difference. The change has to be bigger for you to even notice it.
Okay, I get that. But how does that apply to bees?
Well, researchers have actually found that bees, when they're checking out potential new hives, they seem to follow this same principle. Like the difference between two good hive locations has to be pretty obvious for them to pick one over the other. If the two spots are too similar, they might not even realize there's a difference.
So even tiny little bees are using these really complex ideas to make decisions. It's kind of crazy to think about what else we could learn from them.
Absolutely. And the coolest thing is understanding how bees behave isn't just about learning more about nature. It's actually leading to some really useful stuff, especially in technology.
Oh, really? How are bees inspiring new technology?
Well, scientists and engineers are studying how bees act, especially how they make decisions. And they're using that to develop what are called algorithms that can solve really complicated problems.
Algorithms, like the things that decide what I see on social media.
Exactly. But the algorithms we're talking about here are inspired by how bees make decisions as a group. And they're being used in things like figuring out the best routes for deliveries and making networks run more smoothly.
So instead of looking for flowers, the algorithm is like searching for the fastest way to get a package delivered.
You got it. They call it the artificial bee colony algorithm. And it basically copies how bees explore different options and then share information about the best paths they found. Eventually, it finds the most efficient solution.
That's amazing. So by watching these little bees, we can learn about biology and how our brains work, but we can also learn how to solve problems in the real world.
Exactly. Nature has had a really long time to figure out the best ways to do things. And by studying these natural systems like bees, we can get new ideas for solving our own problems.
This whole deep dive has been seriously eye-opening. I never thought there was so much going on with these little creatures.
It just shows that nature is full of surprises, and even the smallest things can be incredibly complex.
Speaking of complex, you mentioned there was another one of these psychophysical laws that bees seem to follow. What was that one called again?
Oh yeah, that was Hicks' law. And it says that the more options you have to choose from, the longer it takes to make a decision. Like think about it, if you only have to choose between two things, it's a pretty easy decision, right?
Yeah.
But if you have to choose between 10 things, it takes way longer.
Oh, yeah. I totally get that. Like when you're staring at a menu with a million choices and you just can't decide. Too many options. But how does this apply to bees? I thought they usually just had one hive to decide on.
Not always. Remember those scout bees? They might find a bunch of different places that could work for a new hive. And studies have shown that when they have more options, it takes the whole colony longer to agree on the best one.
So even bees get overwhelmed when they have too many choices. It's kind of comforting to know we're not the only ones who struggle with that.
It just goes to show that a lot of the ways we think and make decisions are actually shared by different species.
This is also fascinating. I never thought I'd learn so much about myself from studying bees.
That's what I love about science. It always leads to these unexpected discoveries that change how we see the world.
And it's really inspiring, too. These tiny creatures working together can do such incredible things. It really makes you think about what we as humans could accomplish if we all work together towards a common goal.
That's a really powerful thought. This whole idea of bee democracy reminds us that when we work together and respect everyone's ideas, we can do amazing things.
Well said. I think we've all learned a lot today from this. deep dive into the world of bee democracy.
It's been a pleasure talking about this with you.
Before we wrap things up, is there anything else you want to share about bee behavior or any cool research that's happening in this area?
One of the most exciting areas of research right now is looking at how bee colonies are dealing with changes in the environment,
Hmm.
especially with things like climate change and habitat loss.
That's a really important point. Bees are so important for pollinating plants, so their health is directly tied to our own survival.
Exactly. If we can understand how bees make decisions and adapt to change, maybe we can help them survive in a world that's changing so quickly. And that would benefit everyone, including us.
It sounds like the more we learn about bees, the better we'll be able to protect them and make sure we all have a healthy future.
Absolutely. It's a great example of how science and conservation work together.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this amazing deep dive into the world of bee democracy. This has been such an incredible journey into the world of bees. I feel like I'll never look at them the same way again.
It really makes you realize just how much intelligence and complexity there is in nature, even in the tiniest creatures.
Absolutely. So the next time you see a bee buzzing around, are you just going to see a bug, or are you going to see this tiny part of this incredible and surprisingly democratic system?
It definitely changes how you see things.
Hmm.
And hopefully it makes us all think a little more about how connected we all are.
That's a great point. So on that note, we have one final question for you, our listener. Something to think about as you go about your day.
Ooh, I like it. What's the question?
Okay, here it is. If bees, with their tiny little brains, can work together to make decisions that benefit their entire colony, could we humans learn a thing or two from them? Could understanding how they make decisions help us make better choices both on our own and as a society?
That's a really powerful question. It challenges us to think about the importance of collaboration and respecting different points of view and maybe learning from the natural world to build a better future.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the amazing world of bee democracy. Thanks for listening, everyone, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep an eye out for those incredible bees.